minute that you start turning away customers and you were able to find another location, you would.
I think we're seeing way more people either renting a chair or working from the garage.
Welcome to yet another episode of Never Mind the Buzz Cuts. My name is Alex Burt. I'm joined here with my co-host Sam Campagna. Is it worth expanding in 2025? So Sam, give us your thoughts. What do you reckon?
Well, I think there's a long backstory to this, isn't there? Because, you know, we've both had like multiple businesses, you know, or still have multiple businesses. And I suppose I'm the type of person that always wants to be going somewhere. So I was on Instagram earlier and there was a guy's post that I saved, and it was all about how the industry now needs to adopt self-employment, like that's the only way forward, and all these other suggestions into, you know, what you need to do now in 2025. I think a lot of people and a lot of successful barbershop owners out there will always advocate and highlight, you know, their successes, how great it is. And maybe they come from an era where it was maybe a bit easier. I don't know. I think that's up for discussion today, but I think it really depends on what your end goal is. So is it worth expanding? I've known a few people recently that have gone on to open up a second shop, and in their own right, they're really good barbers. They've got a really successful shop and they've gone to open up number two. And this generation that I'm seeing open up their second, I may be opening it up based on, you know, the values of success of their current shop, which I suppose we all have to start off with one successful shop. So, but maybe the kind of process in the second in today's market is maybe slightly different to when I've done it, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
I mean, do you think, I suppose, like the one big question really that people have to ask themselves if they did want to expand their business is like, how are they actually going to do that? Are they going to expand their business internally, or are they going to do it externally, i.e. get multiple locations? Now, in my opinion, my humble opinion in the years that I've been doing it, was that I think the natural process and the natural evolution of business growth back in the day was to have another location. It was always on the subject of like conversation, especially during the ascending busy years that we had. It was always you know, look at you, you know, you're absolutely smashing it. This place is heaving. When's the next one happening? And you go, I don't know, you know, and then, you know, sort of come pre-pandemic, so 2019, you know, the barbering industry, I think, was riding probably at a peak.
Yeah, for sure.
And, you know, everything was, you know, all about growth. Everything was all about development. Everything was about evolution, and the shops were getting better. The shops were getting smarter. So I think it was easy back then to get caught up in that. Whereas retrospectively now, having opened up my third shop, I'm sort of thinking to myself, right, well, maybe instead of opening another multiple location, which is going to cost you not just like time, but energy and like your mental bandwidth, it's going to be cheaper to grow your business internally as opposed to externally, right?
Yeah, I think so. Mine was definitely correlated with the fear of failure. You know, my first shop was 2010. I think it was 2014 or 15, roughly, that I opened a second.
Mm-hmm.
And I always find it amusing in a way that back then I had almost zero business knowledge. There was almost zero people helping you kind of figure this shit out. And it kind of feels very different today, yet in some way feels harder. So I'm not sure if the information we've got is almost too much, and, you know, we're not just kind of going for it like we did. But
we're having more to contend with, though. Once upon a time, barbering was simple. Now, the guys that trained you and me, for example, like your old school Italian barbershops or some of the old school barbershops that, you know, are around on the Brighton scene that paved the way for the industry now, they, you know, people just turned up to get their hair cut. That people's appreciation of grooming was far less then than it is now. So, you know, I believe that the industry's become more complicated. You know, you have to stand out of the crowd due to market saturation. So, with that comes marketing, social media, differentiating yourself. So what service offers you have, how you cut hair, are you going to be just an old school barber that's just going to cut hair shorter, or are you going to deliver what the public now expect from you? So I think like the position of being a barber now is a lot more complicated than it ever once was. I think what would happen back in the day is that you would get busier and busier and busier. And the minute that you start turning away customers and you were able to find another location, you would. But then rent back then was cheaper. Everything was a lot more cash in hands. There wasn't booking systems. So I think the whole process was a lot simpler. People, barbers used to just do 50 and that was it. It was very rare that you got like chair rent. But even now, like all the water's been muddied with, sort of like, is chair rent legal or is percentage legal? Who knows? Like, and as you said, you were starting from scratch with no business knowledge. So where did you where at what place were you coming from back then?
Well, I think there's a kind of career projection, isn't there? Right, and you kind of go, oh, I worked in these places, and I would hop around a lot. I was one of those people that I would go somewhere, I'd go, right, I've outgrown it. You start being busier than the owner, and then you think, oh, like, I'm the bollocks here, like I'm the bee's knees, and you kind of move on. And little to my knowledge at the time, that moving on was fundamental to then getting my own place. But when you said about it was less complicated, I don't know why the 80s and 90s. I'll have to actually do a bit more of in-depth research on this. Maybe I'll ask ChatGPT for it. But 80s and 90s seem to be the era that barbering fell off the cliff. Because I think actually the 70s and before were actually, it was quite complicated. It was quite intricate blow drying. It was, actually, quite hard work. But from a business perspective, I think it was quite a big thing and risk for these people to go and open up a business in the 70s and the 80s. It seems almost, and the 90s maybe, but it seems a bit less so nowadays. I want to tell you a little story about one of my favourite ever bosses, and he happens to be one of my friend's dads that I went to work with. And he always told me the story that he was working with this Greek guy, and he must be, Tony now must be 75, something like that. And he's still cutting behind the chair, still in the same shop. And
same age as Phil Jarman.
About the same age as Phil Jarman. He'll love that when he listens to this. And St Albans, I don't know, now is 150,000 people. And we've got, maybe around 60 total hairdressers and barbershops combined, excluding a lot of freelancers. So he told his boss at the time when he was a young man, look, I've found the shop and I'm going to go and open up my own business. And this old Greek fella went, do you know what, mate? If I was you, I wouldn't bother. He goes, there is so many barbershops already in St Albans. And I said, Tony, how many barbershops were there? He went 3. I mean, admittedly, the population was smaller, but they put everything into that one place. And because they couldn't be present at other places and it all relied on them, I think it was really hard to ever envisage expanding to another location, because actually their main focus and drive was, this is a big thing. Like, this is a big risk, like buying a car years ago was a big investment. I think we're following that kind of pathway where we know money can be borrowed cheap and all that kind of stuff. So I think certainly that is a really small aspect of maybe the past, and maybe what's a little bit different now is, the ideas, the borrowing money, the risk taking, is a big thing. But yeah, I just went and opened up a shop. I went to see it in like December 2009, and I never thought I'd ever get my own shop. I never thought it would be a thing. I thought, I'm never going to be able to do this. Like, where'd you get the money from? All this kind of stuff. And it was in like January, February, and I was staring out my window, and I thought, you know what, if I'm going to better myself and the family situation between me and my partner, I've got to take a risk. And I remember staring out the window thinking, right, if that shop's available, I'm going to call. If it's available, I'm going to just say yes. Apart from the hand clapping and saying, oh, I went and done it myself. And I found 2 antique Koken chairs on eBay. They were owned by a dentist. They had no idea what they were. I had no idea what they were. They were painted. We bought them for like 600 quid, not knowing they were worth about £4,000 each. And we restored them, me and my dad, and got them all re-chromed, and just had this shop with 2 seats in it. And to your point, what used to happen was, what the hell is that? Balloons coming up on the screen.
What's that?
I don't know. That was a funny glitch for those people listening on Spotify. We just had balloons appear on the TV screen. So, we done it all ourselves. I had like £5,000. The labour was all ours. And, I had this lovely quaint shop on George Street in St Albans, which is, was dubbed the old King's Road of St Albans. It still is, actually, but it was quite dead down there. And I put these chairs in, made it look the way I wanted it to. And it was just on your point. You would get busy. I'd be like, oh my goodness, like, what do I do now? And I remember then making the chairs further apart, adding another chair. I actually drove to Murdoch's in London and bought a chair off them with a van, drove back to the shop, went and bought another mirror off my mate, put the middle chair in, and kind of kept on going. Then we went into the basement. Then I put another one in the basement. And actually, I suppose the where I want to get to with this is that I think some sound business advice is, when you want to expand, there's almost like a magic, not number, but a magic kind of equation and feeling. And one of them is, I feel that we've outgrown this place. The other one is looking at the numbers. And I think you've got to look at the market cap of where your shop is, the chairs, and, the potential of that shop. Meaning, what is the efficiency? What's the maximum efficiency that you can get out of each chair, right? Because I love the question when clients go, oh, you're looking at a new place. Oh, how many chairs can you fit in? I'm like, what is that question about?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't mean that I've got 10 chairs. You would think, though, that would be true, that I've got 10 chairs, so I'd get 10 people in. But it's the real burning question is, how efficient can those chairs be? So then we start talking barber hours and stuff like that. So I think that's one of the fundamental things of going forward is that magic number of going, look, if the market cap, for example, for that area is 300 grand, if you're sitting at like 275, you've got to think about moving, or you've got to think about settling in and you're in for the long ride, because apart from expanding on services and stuff like that, if you've got nowhere else to expand within that business kind of physically, I think you have to kind of weigh up the options of, do I move to a bigger place? Do I get a second, or do I kind of stay put? And funny enough, as you know, Alex, they're options I've had in front of me recently, and we're choosing to move to a bigger place and make more of it than kind of where we are now.
Do you think? Well, I suppose as well. The thing is as well. It's all very well, I think, doing what you've got planned doing, which is you're going to relocate your current business to a bigger unit to accommodate the demand for the business, plus allow for expansion. Now, I would put that as that you're growing the business internally, that you're not growing it externally. I think growing it externally, I think it was Tarek Cowles had it on his Insta, and it cracked me up. He said, do you remember when you was a kid and you used to think that, oh, hang on a minute, if I earn like $300 a month, and I do that and I work for 4 months, I'll have $900. There was that old sort of like that kids math. And I think a lot of barbers, because they don't have that business knowledge, or they don't have the people to fall back on, is that they almost sort of just do that barber math. And they just think to themselves, oh, well, I'm absolutely smashing it at the moment. So what I'll do is I'll find another shop. And by the way, just for everybody watching or listening, I've done exactly this kind of math as well. So don't come bashing on me.
Same.
And I've gone, oh, well, we're absolutely killing it. So if I open another shop, then we'll just kill it there. And it's like, well, maybe the secret in your sauce is that you've got a tight-knit crew and you're not going to be able to multiply that. Sometimes, the planets do only align once, and, you'll get that really good crew, and thinking that you're going to replicate that crew in another shop, and then having to A, find them, B, get them up and running, and then C, like manage them and make sure that they're all harmonious and it all works smoothly, whilst paying all the bills and subsidizing your new unit on the money that you're earning from the first unit, doesn't always equate.
Well, you don't go and earn double, do you? You don't go and get another shop with you don't go and get another shop and it doubles, for example. And actually, the third shop gets even less, and the fourth shop, I would argue almost got less. What you got back, and someone's going to say, well, why did you bother doing it? But on your point of things aligned, I opened my first one in 2010. By just before COVID, we had 4 shops. So within 10 years, we had 4 shops, and I would say, and most people that know me from back then would say that it was quite a passive scale up, and it was because I wanted to get people on board, train them, and that was the philosophy and ethos of the company at the time. But what the key point is here of the timing is, in 2010, expenses were lower, rents were lower. Look at the last kind of couple of years, how much everything has gone up, and we're like, hold on a minute, like what? And Alex, and for the people listening are now going to know that, I've been looking at places, around my area, and I know I live and I'm surrounded by probably, the 10 cities outside London, towns and cities outside London that are the most expensive places to live, right? Because they're all commute belt. Maybe there's that bias, and someone, areas that it's a little bit more reasonable rents are still in a bit of a favourable position. But I'm looking at things going, do you know what? To expand, you've either got to go, I need secondary parade here because that's the only way the maths works, or, you've got to go, I've got to go big. And I think I see a lot of people kind of quite obviously turning to investors and, investments for these kind of big London ventures, and, big ventures that, require, maybe 150 grand kind of capital, because how else are they going to do it? There's roads around here that are secondary, and all the shops are almost in that golden belt of going, yeah, every single one of those shop rents is doable. In a mile stretch, there's 8 because the maths works. But we're probably gonna find that if you want to be in town centres and you want to be like prominent and you want to be in great locations, I think even places outside my areas are going to get more and more difficult for the maths to work. And we're going to see barbershops receding away from ground floor high street. And actually, I've already seen this, but you see them going upstairs. And that was really common again in the 80s. Like people started moving upstairs, and loads of my uncle's salon was upstairs, his barbershop. And I don't know how, for the life of me, it was packed night and day and people standing on the stairs. It was for a reason, people were being pushed off the high street. And I think that cycle is coming round again. So, I think
so.
It's definitely harder.
Yeah, definitely. Because if you think there's, you got the, again, like to coin the phrase, like the Hayden Cassidys of the world, you had these people like at the top of the industry showing people that you don't have to work in a barbershop to have like fame and fortune, or to have a popular business model.
Yeah, but she still worked in a barbershop occasionally, didn't she?
Yeah, but more so now than ever before is that she sort of almost like championed the studio way of working. That there are people out there now that do have their own sort of like private studios, and that they operate from that because of Instagram, because of TikTok, and because of like Google Maps, for example. You don't have to be like on a retail parade anymore. People can find you. There's a sandwich shop down the road from where we are. Shout out to Tom Sandwiches. He's like, the guy's a legend, makes the best sandwiches in Brighton, but you would never ever walk past his unit. But he's always stacked. He's always busy because people know about him online.
And I hate to bring this up. I think food at the moment is the most trending thing compared to barbering, and maybe we were trending a little while ago. But I've got a good story about when you're a good business that's constantly evolving, and I know you're good at what you do, and people that I know that work really hard on their businesses, I would say the same to them. We had a guy go and work from his shed, garage, whatever, for about 2 years. Excellent barber. Everything that he done was great, and he kind of just didn't understand why he couldn't pocket it all himself. But hey ho, I've had that phone call from him now. He's got his own business going, all right, now I get it, mate. But anyway, that's a different story. I'm glad I could have helped him. So he went away and came back 2 years later going, do you know what? Like, I just kind of missed the salon space. Honestly, man, he was so far removed from how far ahead we'd got in that time, because you're having to work on your business, right? In a shop front, you're having to work on your business. When you're in your studio, you've got to work on yourself, and that's it. So the business is moving forward sometimes at such a rate because we're always having to change, evolve, deal with X, Y, and Z. You know, I'm not shunning it, but I would find sitting in somewhere by myself my worst nightmare. I want a team. I want to work with people. You know, younger people that come on board keep me young. So I love that.
Yeah.
And it keeps me pushing for them. I said this on stage when we were together. You know, I do this business side to keep pushing for the people I'm with, you know, and I find that's always been my main goal. You know, like I've got people with me now that I know they're there because they know I'll push forward. And even though I've had a couple of quiet years since I sold my business, it churns and churns and churns in my head that I've got to go and do it. But do you know what? I think if I'm going to do a second business, I think it's about helping someone in my team grow rather than I'm going to take this on my shoulders and, you know, support it like I've got to be there like I did back in the day. Whether that works or not, I don't know. But I think you need that dedication from that individual to push it in the same way you would. And, you know, that takes educating them and teaching them, you know, being vulnerable and open and business-like to them for that business to succeed. But I think you've got some stark business contrast now, haven't you? I think we're seeing less of people going to open up a second by themselves. I think we're seeing way more franchise models. And I think we're seeing way more people either renting a chair or working from the garage.
Do you think that, I don't know, the demand for barber chairs has changed in the sense of, you know, so like our barbers now are sort of probably more predisposition to be self-employed and just to flat rate rent a chair within the shop? Or do you think that people at the moment are looking for a little bit more security with like a paying wage each month?
I'm going to say this as brutally as I possibly can. I think if you're shit, you're looking for employment. And if you're good, you're looking to establish yourself in a business that's going to help you establish yourself.
Amen.
And I think that's as clear as it is. I think that this generation basically I blame businesses if they're not involving. If they're complaining about the situation they find themselves in with their staff, I just see that they're not focusing and working on their business enough. If you're going to be adamant that one way is the right way, then do you know what? I think you're already kind of heading in the wrong direction. I think that's a downward spiral. And I'm not advocating here for a salon to be full self-employment, right? Or a salon to be full employment. I'm saying if you haven't done either of them, all right, how do you know whether one can function or not? And I'm not just saying about people saving tax. Look, there's a load of rubbish out there that people are renting chairs for, you know, £100 a week and all this kind of stuff. That's just someone going, I need to fill this chair and, you know, I just want to cover some expenses. That's not a business. That is just kind of going, I'm going to try and keep my head above water. So all the kind of employment side that are now lamenting, I was there. I said this in 2021, I think, in meetings over the phone. If we don't change and evolve how we deal with the top echelon of barbers, we're only going to go one way. It took me selling my business and believing in that to actually go and do it myself and try it. And my salon now is a mix. I employ the key people that are actually working for the business, and then people who want to work under their own regime in a way that is completely by the letter of self-employment. Why am I going to say no? You know, you have to follow the guidelines and rules to the maximum of your capabilities. You know, this isn't a mess around thing. You know, it's like that chair just hasn't got an equation of rent, cost, this and that and the other. A lot of things, you know, the faculty that is that business, even though they don't work for the business, if you go and contract for Google, you know.
Yeah, but do you know what? I know where you're getting at, and I heard a great bit of advice recently, which was about shifting the mindset of how you treat your staff to actually treating them like your clients, like the self-employed ones, for example.
So yeah, because then they're not your staff, arguably, if they're self-employed, right? Yeah.
Because they're not your staff.
Yeah.
You know, what you're doing is providing a service for people
Correct.
to work within your shop. So
Correct.
if you actually, think, do you want to be a barbershop owner that doesn't give a shit and just like turns out and goes, fuck you, pay me? Or like, are you gonna bring value to your premises and say to yourself, right, I am gonna treat like these guys that work within my roof as well as I treat my customers?
Yeah.
And
sure.
I think that is a much more valuable way of looking at how you're going to run your business, because what you're speaking of is that how you operate on a daily basis and what motivates you comes from a place of being able to develop people and to leave a legacy.
Yeah, but I'll still have that with my apprenticeships. They say, apprenticeships are dying, but running a hybrid model, can almost be controversial because some people think that the two can't work. But in one of them, I'm building a business that is about growth and those individuals and helping them grow. And the other one is, hey, look, I want you to work in the same roof as me. And this is how you want to work, and you want to go and do your own thing. And you know what? People go and cut hair from home. They go and work elsewhere. Yeah. I don't say anything because I know what me as a person, is there to do. I know what my goal is individually. If that person then goes, I want to go and open up a shop, they're conversations that I had outside of, what is the barbershop. That's where I become your mentor, and that's out of, my business. There's nothing to do with it, But you see the rise now, and I think you've obviously seen it as well, but you see the rise of these co-working spaces, So America have adopted it. I kind of sit here and go, well, why aren't we doing a better job of adopting a structure that actually works, that is contracting, stroke self-employment, stroke, co-working space?
Well, I think that's an easy one, and that's simply. I think it's simply because the rules and regulations for what is self-employed or what is self-employed is not clear enough, and like those boundaries haven't been set out by the government. Quite clearly, the government don't understand how our industry works, and so I think if the government don't fully understand, how are we as an industry to be able to follow the rules and regulations? From what I do understand is that in America it is a lot more clearly defined.
Yeah. But you just introduce what they do on a building site. You have to hold back their national insurance. Yeah, there's IR35 and you pay national insurance. This isn't about VAT. Like, obviously there's been a lot about this court case and it's, but like, I pay VAT. Like, really? Like, yeah, again, I can't remember who it was. It's that chap in Ireland. I can't remember his name right now. I can't remember. He's got like loads of barbershops and he's
Neil Turner?
No, not Neil. I spoke to Neil, lovely guy. We had a conversation and he actually helped me out. But anyway, I can't remember this guy's name right now. And he was saying that, the way you work out someone's salary is you take their salary and times it by 2.5. Right? And someone sent me and goes, what do you think about this? And I went, so I said, minimum wage on like a 45-hour week is not far off 30 grand a year. I'm there going, so you're asking someone for that business to work to turn over what, 75 grand, 80 grand? Because really, he was saying it should be 3x. And actually, that is the equation. The equation is, if you're looking at a business kind of literature and book, is that you should never give away more than 30% of that person's turnover, right? I'll also flip that round. It should be a minimum of 30% of a contractor's turnover of what you charge them, right? So whether that's fixed or not, you have to work out what that is, bare basics. But what we're asking businesses to do is say to someone, look, you got to turn over 90k as a barber, almost to be at minimum wage, right? So fundamentally,
at the same time, you want them to deliver a premium service.
Well, you want them to deliver a premium service, and yet, some places are being hard done by trying to push 20 quid. And, for a haircut, and they got nowhere to turn because they're like, I can't do anymore.
Well, but so I discovered a new Instagram page today, just popped up on the feed. Forgive me if I get this wrong, but it's either AMC Studio or Studio AMC. I can't remember which way. But Aaron McLeod, he's like based in Manchester. He's like one guy who's got his own studio, and he had this reel about talking about perceived value. Is that women can buy a handbag for thousands and thousands of pounds, as we all know, but it still doesn't really sort of change it from a handcrafted Italian leather bag that you can buy like on the streets of Sicily, right? It's still a handmade, beautifully sourced leather, like gorgeous handbag, but it's because of the badge and the brand that something brings, people are willing to pay more for the perceived value of whatever that end product is. And barbering's no different. And I think where barbers fall short, and I think that, and I speak for probably like the majority of the industry, is that everyone's so fucking focused on what their local competitors are charging. But what if the local competitors aren't charging what they should be charging? Then what you've got is a false economy, right? So what I've always noticed, whenever I've pushed the prices up, okay, you're going to lose a few customers here and there, yeah. But do you know, I feel so much better about charging what I charge because I believe that I'm giving them what I'm actually worth now.
I sat in a seminar when I went to Chicago, to CBS, and I sat in a room with Ivan Zoot, who's written quite a few books. I think they're worth a read. They're like, how to become $100,000 a year barber and how to build a barbering business and all that kind of stuff. But one thing that rang true to me was that he was like, look, when you're at 80% capacity, which for most people that don't know, if they actually like broke down how many hours they work per day with their gaps, with this, 80% feels fully booked. So it feels like, 85% means that you don't even get a break kind of thing. It's impossible to be 100% full because you can't fill every minute of every day. So he had this thing of like, when you're 80% full, it was like, if you put your price up by 10%, if your productivity only drops 5%, you're still making money. That was his point. And then it grows from there, which I think is partially true. I think there's always a bit of an air of caution that, where your business is, how it's perceived, is kind of squared to what you should involve in the equation of charging.
If you're delivering, like if your environment and everything about your station and everything about your setup just says bang average, then all you can ever charge is bang average. If all your tools are covered in shit and there's crap everywhere, there's nothing wrong with that. We're not.
Yeah, but people are still doing that, charging high, and their tool stations dirty and shit and whatnot.
Are you going to expand your business because you're so fucking busy that you've got to open up another place, or do you think to yourself, like what you were just saying about Ivan Zoot, for example, is that all you've got to do is just readjust your figures marginally per customer, and before you know it, you're actually making a hell of a lot more money throughout the year. And it's costing you far less than what it actually takes to open up your own place.
One of the biggest bugbears of mine on social media is when I see people saying, I've put my price up and we're going to put £1 on each service. And I'm like, my God, that shows me you know nothing about, listen, if you're cautious as a person, you don't want to put your price up, I understand. If you're kind of saying, but the next guy down the road, do you know what? I kind of get it. I don't think that should be a thing, but I get it, why people have that emotional attachment to money and pricing. But when you have a haircut at 15, a kid's haircut at 10, a beard service at 5, I hope no one has those prices, but I'm sure there are, and you put everything up by £1, percentage wise, it's completely cack. Like, what are you doing, man? Like, seriously, but I think,
and also don't apologise or fucking tell people that you're putting your prices up. Tell me what other industry does that.
I think if you look at, like you did a minute ago, a haircut compared to a handbag, I asked someone this question. I'll keep this really brief, but I asked someone this question of like, well, he had a mechanics, and I said, well, when you pay someone, what is their salary squared to? So ours is squared to output of haircuts, right? You could say, right? But it's not always that, because people, especially in an employed environment, bring things to the company, and their perceived value may be slightly more than that. But you know what? He couldn't answer me because his wages were essentially just made up. So if you look at hairdressing as in, right, a haircut is a product off a shelf, right? It's easy to compare it like for like as a product. I think where that is potentially a little bit dangerous is that the product is the person cutting your hair, as much as the environment, as much as, you know, the coffee, as much as the wet wipe you give them at the end of the service. You know, all those kind of things have their own individual perceived value. I think most of society still sees haircuts like a product off the shelf. A lot of clients that don't really know my business and its worth and our worth pop their head through the door and say, excuse me, mate, how much is it for like a haircut? And you're like, oh, Jesus Christ, here we go. Right? And you tell them and they go, oh no, but I just want a normal haircut. And I'm like, what, you just want, can I go and get a chicken, please? Yeah, I just want a normal chicken. Like, what the hell? And it is that kind of thing of like, you know, at the end of the day, you were wasting our breath if you're trying to tell, if someone's only got a fiver, they're going to buy something that's a fiver, right? I think that's fundamental. And then we'll go and find people to do that. You know, they'll find someone to go round their house and do it for that in the short term. We're trying to put plasters this industry right now. That's how I see it, right? Whether it's business growth, whether it's pricing growth, there's plasters being put on everything. And I think the change has to come from the foundation. It has to come from there. It's the only way I think you'll grow in 2025.
So what is the foundation?
Well, the foundation of making a business or making barbering, as far as I'm concerned, you know, more linear as I see it. Because I don't particularly think there's right and wrong in this situation, because, you know, when a certain part of the industry is alienated, they'll kick off about it, right? So that comes with its own kind of issues and problems. But I think if you make a business linear, so, okay, what's the fundamental way that our industry has to work? So it either has to adopt one or the other. It can't really sit in the middle. We can explore them now because we're allowed to explore whether we want to be a self-employed salon or not. But it has to be linear. There has to be going, okay, if you, like you said about their guidelines. So what does that mean? You know, everything's disguised employment. I gave this contractor some advice. Oh, that's disguised employment. It's like, okay, is it though? Like what do guidelines mean? You know, and I think that's where it's a bit cloudy. And it's like, employment's no different. I don't see employed salons wearing a bloody Superman cape with super employment salon, you know, hanging out the back here. You know, let's not put a crown on employment, right? And
I could actually probably argue that I've probably received far greater mentorship through all my self-employed places that I worked as over the employed places that I worked in.
Well, yeah. I mean, how much load bearing cost can now an employment salon bear? You know, like we went through those figures a minute ago, as in, you know, what you have to earn. So of course, there's a downward spiral at the moment where there's nothing they can afford or left in the pot to grow. So when you make everything a bit more level, and like I said earlier, that's not curing VAT. In fact, do you know what? If they reduced VAT, you do me a favour as well. So keep championing that thought.
Keep flying the flag.
because I pay VAT as well. And, you know, I try and use all the avenues that are guidelines to negate that. But
you know, that's 10%. Thank you very much.
That's between, you know, you and your accountant at the end of the day. But I think the problem lies that if tomorrow they said, right, self-employment stops, I think the business of barbering and hairdressing that operate that way will be more catastrophic in its loss to the revenue that comes in from our industry to the government coffers.
Go. That's the source right there, ladies and
Hey,
gentlemen.
look. What are the facts? If the facts are 60 to 70% of our industry is now self-employment, right? Actually, you're affecting a bigger part of the industry.
Yeah. I mean, for me and how I run, I like to think that we always stay slightly ahead of the curve. So, for example, like we were on booking, like we were doing online booking way before.
Yeah, same.
When lockdown happened, we were already up and running, and it was seamless, and it was, you know, we oversold our appointments. So again, getting back to how this conversation has first started off, what we want to do is just kind of like highlight some of the realities of you know, when you are looking to expand your business or to go to another unit, of just exactly, you know, what that possibly might entail. But you know, sort of, I've got some notes behind me, and I think if it comes from a place of making more money, and your desperation dictates that you should open up a new unit, then maybe it's something to do with your business and not to do with the demand of the business that your business is providing.
Yeah, and a lot of, you know, first time successful businesses, or, you know, first operation that you open up in barbering is led by, like I said before, a successful person. When that successful person can no longer be torn into two shops, it does get harder. So I've seen that, where at the moment I've seen a lot of places that I know that are just employing kids, and you got to understand that if you're not nurturing the new talent and then growing, I think that's dangerous. I mean, I've never opened up a shop without a team ready to go in.
Well, I mean, from experience, when I opened up shop number 2, I left what was an extremely oversubscribed, really busy shop thriving, albeit it was just very much the same story as what you had. Was you know, we had, you know, sort of 2 chairs squeezed into a tiny little unit. We had a staff room downstairs. I fucked the staff room off and just put another chair down,
Yeah.
because that's all we had. There was nowhere at the time like available to move into anything bigger, so that's why shop number 2 came along, because just everything just happened at the right time. But even then, when I went to shop number 2, I then started that one from scratch, and then grew the team from that, and then developed and evolved over a matter of years. When it came to shop number 3, yes, I had a team ready and raring to go. And do you know what? To this day, I still put my hand on my heart and say that the guys that I implemented into shop number 3 was a phenomenal barbering team. Unfortunately, they just didn't work out, and I think that's probably because I was pissed on my own importance and riding high in the ego of the first 2 shops that I had, and I just naturally assumed that going from Brighton and Hove to Worthing, it just would have been an instant success, but that wasn't the case. And it was tough. And coming back to what you were saying about, you know, working on your own versus working with a team, look, I'm just going to have to work like day and night in that shop just to make it work. And that's what I had to do. I just went back to my old school basics, and just like every single person that walked through that door, I accommodated them. I built the business up, and that's how I got it going. But, you know, I drove myself fucking crazy, like, you know, 6 months on my own, and I was done. But in that process, and I'm happy to admit this, or unhappy to admit, whichever way you want to look at it. But, you know, my other 2 shops, my Brighton and Hove shop, the teams got neglected because I couldn't be in all the places all the time. So, you know, as a result, you know, the shops weren't operating in the ideal way that I would have wanted them to work. But I was lucky enough that I did have strong teams behind me, and that the guys, you know, were able to sort of continue the shop opening in the way that the company needed it to happen.
I think you always need, you know, when you expand, there's, you know, a couple of parameters. One is they're there for you. One is that they're there for a strong brand, and obviously you've got both of them, and they're valuable to people, you know. And I think maybe that's been the story, maybe like myself in the past, 10, 12 years, that's held its value. And now people are obviously trying to concentrate on themselves and their own brands, how they can push themselves forward to eventually have their own shop, which is great. I've always tried to encourage that as well. But we're closer to, you either have got to build a brand and expand with people. I think, you need partnerships, to grow in 2025. Or I think you need to be really business minded and create a franchise model and not worry about what those individual things are doing outside of the proposed structure and guidebook and handbook. And
Yeah, and also I think like when you start out, you have to ask yourself, what kind of business do you want?
Yeah, but we don't, do we? Because the reality is that, like we said earlier on, there's a shop, it's 10 grand, it's £200 a week, right? That's, 10 haircuts at 20 quid. Is it though?
Like the math.
It's like, at least if you want to go basic, take that rent, double it and add VAT. Like that's almost like bare bones basic. It's still barber maths, but, at least you're going to be less surprised than, if you do it based on, haircuts, rent, and that's why we see so many people moving on, right? That's why in your area, in my area, someone will work for someone, they'll rent a chair, at a reasonable cost or maybe a more correct like equation. And then they'll just go, look, there's a shop up there. Let's go and do it. And all of a sudden we've created this paradox of everyone opening up their own shop and there's one person in each shop,
No,
so
I'd rather work in.
Well, yeah, I think for me, it was the time to end, growing in the way I was and stepping back and re-understanding exactly what I wanted to do. And I've grown in that time, as a person, as an individual, as a business person. And I think, that holds some great value, but I think it is still worth expanding. I think you can't just bring another barbershop though. You can't bring that.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's like, by all means, expand, and like good business sense to me is maximizing every last % of profit and creativity that you can out of your existing enterprise. My light bulb moment was that as I was stuck in my upteenth traffic jam on that day, and not, stood behind a single chair cutting hair whatsoever, I was like, this is shit, and I fucking hate it. So. Like for me, I then sort of quickly realised I'm not that kind of business owner, and this is not the business for me. I think if you're a numbers man and you're a spreadsheet man, and you're not a creative, then by all means open up multiple locations. Like micromanage, do whatever it is that you've got to do. But I think if you are a barber and the craft of barbering is where you feel the most comfortable and that resonates more than anything else, I think you need to look at more of your service offerings and how you run your business before you sort of knock on the door of the nearest letting agents.
So how about investors? What do you feel about investors? Like what? Because I think that's a growing thing. I've had it. I'm going to say 5 times. And it was quite recent. I had one, and when I sold my business, I had, these kind of meetings with people wanting to invest. Fortunately, as much as I love working with people, I ended up walking away from everything going, yeah, but I'm bringing everything to the table.
Yeah.
So some people had, some ammo in their back pocket, to be fair to them. What do you think of that? What do you think of people like then going, okay, well, I'm good at this bit, I'm not so good at the maths. Should I get an investor on board?
It's like, where do you start? And it's, again, it brings it full circle back to what kind of business do you want? And for me personally, I've had this once before. I had a good friend of mine. We're still very good friends, and he was like, I see growth potential within your business. And when he sat down, he was like, but you were smashing it all the time,
So hold on a minute. Like the numbers weren't what he thought, I'm guessing.
Exactly. Yeah. He's taken like one snapshot look at the business and gone, every time I walk in this shop, it's fucking stacked. You're turning people away left, right, and centre. You must be fucking like creaming it. But But the cold hard reality is that the way that everything is set up with all our expenses, everything's doubled and everything at the moment is not the business that everybody thinks that it can be, unless you have an ulterior motive for running that business. But for the vast majority of people that are in the industry because they love being part of the industry and they enjoy being a barber and they're great at being a barber, their business model, they need to like rein it back in and think to themselves, what do I need this business for?
There's lots of successful franchises as well out there that, it will probably turn their nose up at some of the things I've said today. But one thing that I do know from some big franchise owners, from the source, is that you stop becoming a barber, you start becoming someone who sells franchises. So you've got to then scrap, what you've been good at for so long and focus on how you set up a franchise. And I think, to be fair, that's why a lot of people are working on their own brand, because they want to like develop then that more. They might not be able to really understand and see what that looks like yet, but I do admire that people are trying really hard to kind of grow and grab the next step. For me, I love that. I would just say, like you say, choose your lane and try and figure out what kind of business owner you want to be. But it did take me, Alex, 13 years to figure that out, of having my own businesses. So I always praise this young generation for being way ahead of where I was when I was 27 and opened up my first shop.
Once upon a time, barbering was far more simple than what it is now. And when you and I first opened up, there was no blueprint, there was no experience. We came from the generation of, you were just, busy at what you did. The natural progression was to open up your own place, and you funded it all with cash, and that was the end of it. But now there's, we didn't have podcasts, we didn't have Reddit forums, we didn't have, sort of like magazines, website forums. There was no sharing of information and experience. So now I think, it's far easier to develop greater business acumen than what we once had. We were just trial and error the whole fucking way.
Yeah, and I still think that the rise of kind of business questions and business knowledge in our industry is that I do think people in generally are interested more in the business side. But I also think that you're looking for someone to like pass over that bottle of secret sauce that doesn't exist.
Yeah. It still doesn't exist.
No,
it's still trial and error now. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Of course it is. But I think because of how our industry is changing, I think the biggest proponent for our industry changing is online booking, period.
Yeah, but you as an individual have got to be on top form in customer service, in haircutting, in all aspects of what you bring to that client, because now it's just you and them. When it was walk-in shops, do you know what? They would go around, they'd have the choice, they'd see who they liked, and that would create the kind of atmosphere and the environment of.
And there was only so many to choose from back then as well.
Yeah, for sure. What advice would you give someone that is in their first shop and looking to open up number two? What would be your best advice from a positive angle?
I think that the key factor is understanding your numbers to the very last penny. Now, I wish that I could say that I followed my own advice, but I definitely don't. I've always come from a place of just like following my heart a little bit more than my head. But I would say for sure you have to look at the most granular of numbers and work out from there first. And then you have to ask yourself what I said earlier, what kind of business is it that you actually want for yourself? Because why is it that you're looking to expand? Because if it comes from a place of wanting to make more money, I can hand on my heart say that if you just increased your prices and maybe looked at the way that you run your business and maybe like just sharpened up your service offering, you could earn exponentially way more money, but without all the ball ache, all the stress, all the financial outlay. So, really look hard at whether you really do want that second shop, because it is not, as you say, the bottle of secret sauce.
No, there isn't. I recently was delving into some books as I normally do, ebooks, because I listen to books, so audio books. And I came across one that I'd listened to something else that was similar, but it was a podcast. And it was really quite funny because there's lots of things in that I already done. And I thought, do you know what, this would help loads of people out. And it's called the no bullshit strategy, right? And having a goal, the thing I took from it, of course, was having a goal is not a strategy. Okay. Having a goal to open up another shop isn't a strategy. You've got to develop a strategy for why you want that second shop. And I think that's important. So I would tell everyone, if you can, before you open up a second shop or you want to understand a bit more about your business, listen to the No Bullshit Strategy. And I think that's a really fun book and kind of puts it into a better perspective. My other positive advice is it's okay not to be cut out to manage people. And I think that's fine. You don't have to do that. So don't feel like people don't always have to break under the pressure of understanding how to manage people. I think that can be really difficult for some people.
Well, look, we had exactly that with Dan Gregory last week, didn't we?
Yeah,
He very quickly came to the realization that actually being a team manager is just not for him.
Yeah, and there's that thing of like, knowing when to walk away. Knowing when to walk away can mean knowing whether to say something isn't for me. It's not necessarily, it's obviously a metaphor for many things. So I think when you look at that second shop, give yourself the reason, make sure it works, and you've got more chance of surviving in this day and age. And I think if you can collaborate with someone, and it's always a hard thing, I don't have a business partner anymore, and people still are amazed that I advocate that working with people alongside people is one of my most paramount things. The difference is you've got to know how to support each other. You've got to know how to support each other. You need to have the support. I've done a lot of things by myself at the detriment of my mental health over the years. So I always say to people, learn how to work with people. Like, it's the most powerful tool, I think, to grow in our industry.
There we go. That's the sauce.
It's one of them. It's one of the ingredients out of the 185 on the back of the bottle.
Talking of bottle,
I think you look like Flat Eric.
I was going to say like a Swan Best to match, but
Alex has dyed his hair white, blonde,
or as my mum said yesterday, green.
I need to add the Flat Eric soundtrack now to this podcast. It's brilliant.
I've got him in the loft somewhere. Sam, is there anything else that you feel that you need to add?
I think, saying stuff on this show and, what we hear online, I think, take as much advice as you can. At the end of the day, when it comes down to business growth, it's our responsibility to take the information, be patient with the people that give it to you. At the end of the day, it's your job to decipher whether it's shit or whether you can use it.
Guys, thank you so much for tuning in.
Thanks, Alex. That's the end of episode 6. I hope you enjoyed the listen. And remember, guys, the buzz starts here.